The needle slipped through Zelda Garrison's calloused fingers for the third time that morning, and she knew it was because her hands were shaking from hunger rather than cold. Though the Montana wind howling through the cracks in the boarding house walls did not help matters any. She pressed her lips together and retrieved the needle from where it had fallen onto the half-finished quilt spread across her lap, determined to complete at least 3 more blocks before sunset, so she might have something to sell at the mercantile tomorrow. The fabric pieces were scraps she had gathered from the generous seamstress 2 streets over, mismatched calicos and worn cotton that nobody else wanted. But Zelda's nimble fingers could transform them into something beautiful, something that might fetch enough coins to buy bread and perhaps a small piece of salt pork if she was lucky. But Montana in the spring of 1882 was a town that had grown too fast for its own good, swollen with miners and prospectors chasing copper and silver in the hills, men who cared little for the niceties of civilization and even less for a young woman trying to survive on her own. Zelda had arrived 6 months earlier after her father's death in a mining accident back in Colorado, following the only lead she had on a distant aunt who was supposed to live here. That aunt had turned out to be a fiction, or dead herself, and Zelda found herself stranded with barely enough money for a week's lodging at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, and no prospects for employment that would not compromise her dignity. So she had turned to the one skill her mother had taught her before consumption took her 5 years past: quilting. Zelda could make a quilt that would keep a person warm through the harshest winter, with stitches so small and even they looked like they had been made by fairy hands. She sold them for whatever price the mercantile owner would give her, which was never enough, always having to negotiate and plead for just a few more cents. The quilts took her days to complete, working by candlelight until her eyes burned and her fingers bled, but it was honest work, and it kept her from the alternatives that other women in her position often had to consider. The door to the small room she shared with 2 other women banged open, and Sarah, one of her roommates, stumbled in with wind-blown hair and red cheeks. "Lord, it's fierce out there today," she said, unwrapping the shawl from around her shoulders. "Saw something interesting at the mercantile, though. There's a cowboy in town, just rode in with a string of horses he's selling to the mining company. Big fellow, looks like he could wrestle a bear and win." Zelda kept her eyes on her stitching. "I am sure the mining company is pleased to have the horses." "He was looking at your quilts," Sarah continued, settling onto her narrow bed with a creak of old springs. "Mr. Henderson had 3 of them displayed, and this cowboy was examining them real close, running his hands over the stitches and everything. Asked who made them." Something flickered in Zelda's chest, a small flame of hope she immediately tried to extinguish. Hope was dangerous when you were living meal to meal. What did Mr. Henderson tell him? Told him some girl who needed the money. The cowboy asked how much for all 3. Now Zelda did look up, her needle suspended in mid-air. "All 3, that's what I heard." I lingered near the pickle barrel to listen. Mr. Henderson quoted him a price, and the cowboy didn't even blink, just pulled out his billfold and paid cash on the spot. Sarah leaned forward with a grin. Then he asked if there were more, and when Mr. Henderson said probably, seeing as how you're always sewing, the cowboy said he'd be staying at the Silver Bell Hotel for the week, and to let him know. Zelda's heart was beating faster now, and she forced herself to take a slow breath. 3 quilts sold at once meant she could pay Mrs. Patterson the back rent she owed and buy proper food, maybe even some better fabric. But it seemed too good to be true, and in Zelda's experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. "Did he say why he wanted them?" Sarah shrugged. "Didn't hear that part. But Zelda, if he's willing to buy more, you should make more. This could be your lucky break." Lucky break. Zelda had stopped believing in those around the time she watched her father's coffin being lowered into the cold Colorado ground. But she was not a fool either, and if some cowboy with more money than sense wanted to buy her quilts, she would sew until her fingers fell off. "I need to finish this one first," she said, turning back to her work. "Then I will start another." She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, long after Sarah and their other roommate had gone to sleep. The single candle burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls as Zelda's needle moved in and out of the fabric with practiced precision. Her stomach growled and cramped, but she ignored it. She had grown accustomed to hunger over the past months, had learned that if she drank enough water and kept her mind occupied, she could push through until the next meal, whenever that might come. By morning, the quilt was finished, a pattern of interlocking stars in blues and browns that reminded her of the Montana sky. Zelda folded it carefully, wrapped it in clean muslin she had been saving, and made her way through the muddy streets to Henderson's Mercantile as soon as the sun was up. The store smelled of coffee and sawdust, and the peppermint sticks Mr. Henderson kept in a jar by the register. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her pause. "Miss Garrison," he said, and his tone was different than usual, less dismissive. "I was hoping you'd come by early. That cowboy I mentioned, he's serious about buying your work. Came back yesterday evening asking about you specifically." "Asking what about me?" Zelda set the wrapped quilt on the counter, suddenly wary. "Nothing improper," Mr. Henderson said quickly, raising his hands. "Just wanted to know your circumstances, whether you were making the quilts for business or pleasure. I told him you were a respectable young lady who had fallen on hard times and was working hard to make an honest living." He cleared his throat. He seemed pleased by that answer, said he'd be by this morning to see if you had anything new. As if summoned by the words, the bell over the door chimed and a man ducked through the entrance, and Zelda understood immediately why Sarah had said he looked like he could wrestle a bear. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway and hands that looked like they could snap a tree branch without effort. But it was his face that caught her attention. Weathered and tanned from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His expression was serious, almost solemn, as he removed his hat and nodded to Mr. Henderson before his gaze found Zelda. "Madam," he said, and his voice was deep and rough, like gravel underfoot. "I'm hoping you're the lady who makes these fine quilts." Zelda straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated by his size or the intensity of his stare. "I am. Zelda Garrison. Cade Owens," he said, taking a step closer. Now she could see that his eyes were a startling green, like spring grass after rain. "I bought 3 of your quilts yesterday, and I'd like to buy more if you have them." "I have this one just finished," she said, gesturing to the package on the counter. "And I can make more, though it takes time. Each quilt requires several days of work." "How much time?" Cade asked. "And what do you need to make them faster?" The question surprised her. "I work as quickly as I can, Mr. Owens. The stitching cannot be rushed if you want quality." "I want quality," he said firmly, "but I also want to know what's limiting you. Is it supplies? Time? Do you have enough fabric, thread, needles?" Zelda glanced at Mr. Henderson, who seemed as puzzled as she felt. "I use what I can afford," she said carefully. "Scraps mostly, and whatever thread I can buy. It's not a question of working faster, it's a question of materials." Cade pulled out his billfold, and Zelda tried not to stare at the thickness of it. He peeled off several bills and handed them to Mr. Henderson. "Set Miss Garrison up with whatever fabric she needs. Good quality, not scraps. Thread, needles, anything else for quilting. Put it on my account." Mr. Owens, Zelda said sharply, I cannot accept charity. Those green eyes fixed on her again, and she saw something flicker in them. Respect, maybe. It's not charity, Miss Garrison. It's a business investment. I'm buying your quilts, and I want them made with proper materials. Consider it a commission. I'll pay you fair price for each one you complete, and you use the supplies I'm providing. That's a business arrangement, not charity. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. Why do you want so many quilts? Cade was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. I have my reasons, he said finally. Good reasons. Will you accept the arrangement or not? Pride warred with practicality in Zelda's chest. Pride said she should refuse, should not accept help from a stranger, should continue as she had been doing. But practicality, and the very real gnawing in her stomach, said she would be a fool to turn down an opportunity that could change her circumstances. I will accept, she said quietly. But I will do good work for you, Mr. Owens. You will not regret this investment. I don't believe I will, Cade said, and now he did smile, just a small curve of his mouth that made him look younger and less intimidating. How long before you can have another quilt ready? 3 days, perhaps 4 with better materials. I'll be here in 4 days then. He placed his hat back on his head and nodded to them both. Miss Garrison, Mr. Henderson, good day. After he left, Zelda stood staring at the door, trying to process what had just happened. Mr. Henderson let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be. That man just bought you a whole shop's worth of supplies. Let me show you what we have in stock. The next hour passed in a blur as Zelda selected fabric, her hands trembling as she touched bolts of cotton and wool that she had only dared to admire from afar before. Rich colors, deep reds and golds and greens, fabric that would make quilts beautiful enough to be family heirlooms. Mr. Henderson helped her choose coordinating threads and even threw in a new packet of needles, finer than the ones she had been using. By the time she left the mercantile, her arms were loaded with packages and her mind was spinning. Back at the boarding house, she spread her treasures across her bed and just looked at them for several minutes, hardly believing they were real. Sarah came in and gasped. Lord above, Zelda, did you rob a bank? A cowboy bought me supplies, Zelda said, and then the full weight of it hit her and she sat down hard on the bed. Sarah, what if I cannot make quilts good enough to justify this expense? What if he decides I have cheated him? Then he's a fool, Sarah said firmly, sitting beside her. Your quilts are beautiful, Zelda. You could sell them for twice what you've been getting if you had the chance to show them to the right people. This cowboy, he must see the quality in your work. Trust that. Trust. Another thing Zelda had little experience with lately. But she spread out the fabric and began planning her next quilt, a pattern of interlocking rings that would showcase the beautiful colors she now had to work with. She cut pieces with careful precision, her scissors making soft, snicking sounds in the quiet room, and began to sew. The quilt took shape over the next 3 days, growing under her hands like a living thing. She had never worked with such fine materials before, and the difference was remarkable. The fabric held the stitches perfectly, the colors sang against each other, and when she finally tied off the last thread and held it up to examine, she felt a fierce pride in her work. This was not just a quilt to keep someone warm. This was art. On the 4th day, she took it to the mercantile and found Cade already there, waiting. He was studying a saddle on display, running his hand over the leather with the same careful attention he had given her quilts. When he saw her, he straightened and came over immediately. Miss Garrison, he said, I was hoping I had the day right. You did. She unwrapped the quilt and spread it across the counter, watching his face as he saw it. His eyes widened slightly, and he reached out to touch it, his big hands surprisingly gentle as they traced the pattern. "This is fine work," he said quietly. "Finer than the others, even though those were beautiful too." "The materials make a difference," Zelda said. "Thank you for providing them." Cade pulled out his billfold and counted out bills, more than she had expected. "That's payment for this quilt and an advance for the next two if you're willing to make them. Same quality, any patterns you choose." Zelda looked at the money, more than she had held at one time in months. It was enough to pay her rent for the next 2 months and buy food and still have some left over. "Mr. Owens, this is too much." "It's what your work is worth," he said firmly. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd call me Cade. Mr. Owens makes me feel like my father." "Then you should call me Zelda," she said, and allowed herself a small smile. "It seems only fair." "Zelda," he repeated, and the way he said her name, careful and respectful, made something warm bloom in her chest. "Would you be willing to tell me about your quilting? I'd like to understand the process better, the work that goes into each one." They stood in the mercantile for the next hour, Zelda explaining about piecing and stitching and patterns while Cade listened with an attention that surprised her. He asked intelligent questions, seemed genuinely interested in the craft, and several times she found herself laughing at his observations about the complexity of it all. When Mrs. Henderson came in to remind her husband about closing time, Zelda was startled to realize how much time had passed. "I should go," she said, "but I will start on the next quilts tomorrow." "Zelda," Cade said as she gathered up her payment and the fabric for her next projects, "would you let me walk you back to your boarding house? It's getting dark and the streets can be rough." She should say no. She barely knew this man, and accepting his escort could be seen as improper. But there was something in his eyes, a genuine concern that had nothing to do with trying to compromise her, and she found herself nodding. "Thank you. That would be kind." They walked through the evening streets of Butte, past the saloons where miners were already drinking away their pay, and the Chinese laundry that was closing up for the night. Cade kept a respectful distance, his long strides shortened to match her pace, and asked her about her life in a way that felt like real interest rather than prying. "I came here looking for family," she found herself saying, "but found none. I have been making my own way since then." "That takes courage," Cade said. "Not many women would attempt it." "Not many women have a choice," Zelda replied. "When you have no family and no money, you do what you must to survive." They had reached the boarding house and Cade stopped at the gate. "You're surviving more than surviving," he said. "You're creating something beautiful in the middle of hard circumstances. That takes more than courage. That takes heart." Zelda felt her cheeks warm, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "You are kind to say so." "Thank you for walking me home, Cade." "It was my pleasure." He tipped his hat to her. "I'll check back in a few days to see how the next quilts are coming along, if that's all right with you." "That would be fine," she said, and realized she meant it. She wanted to see him again, wanted to talk with him more, and that realization was both frightening and exciting. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern developed. Zelda would work on her quilts during the day, her fingers flying over the fabric with new energy and purpose. Every few days, Cade would stop by the mercantile to check on her progress, and they would talk, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for an hour or more. She learned that he owned a ranch about 50 miles outside of Butte, that he raised horses and cattle, that he had built his business from nothing over the past 10 years through hard work and careful management. He learned that she had grown up in mining camps, that her mother had been a refined woman who had fallen on hard times and taught Zelda everything she knew about sewing and quilting, that Zelda dreamed of one day having a small shop where she could sell her work directly to customers. The quilts she completed during this time were the best work she had ever done. Each one was a labor of love, her growing feelings for Cade somehow stitching themselves into the fabric, even as she tried to guard her heart. She told herself not to be foolish, that he was simply a kind man who appreciated quality work, that there was nothing more between them than a business arrangement. But her heart refused to listen to her head, especially when he smiled at her or said her name in that deep, careful way of his. One evening, as he walked her home from the mercantile, Cade was quieter than usual. Zelda glanced at him several times, wondering what was on his mind, but not wanting to pry. Finally, as they reached the boarding house gate, he turned to her with an expression she could not quite read. "Zelda, I need to tell you something," he said. "About why I've been buying your quilts." Her heart sank. Here it was, whatever strange reason he had, probably something that would shatter the pleasant fantasy she had been building in her mind. "All right. I have a sister," Cade said. "Younger than me by 5 years. Her name is Catherine, and she lives on the ranch with me. She has been sick, very sick, with a lung ailment the doctor says is consumption." He paused, his jaw working. "The doctor also says she does not have much time left, maybe a few months, maybe less." "Cade, I am so sorry," Zelda whispered, reaching out instinctively to touch his arm. "Catherine loves beautiful things," he continued. "She always has. She used to sew herself before she got too weak for it. When I came to Butt to sell horses, I saw your quilts in the mercantile window, and they reminded me of the kind of work Catherine used to do. I thought maybe if I brought them home, surrounded her with beautiful things, it might bring her some comfort in her final days." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. All this time, she had been weaving fantasies about Cade's interest in her work, and the reality was so much more painful and pure. He was a brother trying to bring comfort to his dying sister. "Your sister is lucky to have someone who loves her so much," she said softly. "I took the first 3 quilts home last week," Cade said. "Zelda, you should have seen her face. She cried when she saw them, said they were the most beautiful things she had ever seen. She wanted to know all about the woman who made them, and I told her what I knew. She made me promise to bring more and to bring you to meet her if you would be willing." "Me?" Zelda's eyes widened. "Why would she want to meet me?" "Because she says anyone who can create such beauty must have a beautiful soul, and she wants to know you before." Cade's voice cracked slightly. "Before she does not have the chance." Zelda's heart ached for him, for his sister, for the unfairness of life that stole away good people too soon. She knew that ache intimately, had felt it when her mother died, when her father died. "I would be honored to meet Catherine," she said. "When would you like me to come? Would this Saturday be too soon? I could bring a wagon into town, make sure you're comfortable for the journey. It's a long ride, about 4 hours, but the road is decent." "Saturday would be fine," Zelda said. "I will bring the 2 quilts I have nearly finished so Catherine can see them." Cade's face flooded with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Zelda. This means more than I can say." That Saturday dawned clear and cool, perfect for travel. Cade arrived at the boarding house in a well-sprung wagon with a team of beautiful matched horses, and helped Zelda up to the seat with careful courtesy. She had dressed in her best dress, a simple blue calico that her mother had made for her years ago, and had wrapped the 2 finished quilts in clean muslin. As they left Butt behind, heading into the rolling hills and grasslands beyond, Zelda felt a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "Tell me more about Catherine," she said as the horses settled into an easy pace. "What is she like?" Cade's face softened. "She is everything good in this world, kind, gentle, with a laugh that sounds like music. She loves horses and growing things. Before she got sick, she had a garden that was the prettiest thing you ever saw, full of flowers and vegetables both. She used to make preserves and give them to all the neighbors, never wanted anything in return." He was quiet for a moment. She deserved better than this. She deserved to get married, have children, live a long life. Instead, she is 24 years old and dying, and there is not a damn thing I can do to stop it. The pain in his voice was raw, and Zelda felt her own eyes burn with tears. Sometimes all we can do is love people while we have them, she said quietly. It does not seem like enough, but it is all we have. You sound like you know something about loss. I do. My mother died when I was 17. My father 2 years ago. I have no siblings, no other family that I know of. So yes, I understand about loving people and losing them and wishing you could have done more. Cade reached over and briefly squeezed her hand, a gesture of shared understanding that made her heart leap. They rode in companionable silence for a while, and Zelda watched the landscape roll by, noticing how different it was from the bustling chaos of Butte. Out here, the land stretched wide and open, dotted with cattle and the occasional homestead. The mountains rose in the distance, still topped with snow, and the sky seemed bigger somehow, more vast. The Owens ranch, when they finally reached it, was more substantial than Zelda had expected. A large 2-story house sat in a grove of cottonwood trees, with several barns and outbuildings nearby. Corrals held horses of various colors, and she could see cattle grazing in the fields beyond. It was clear that Cade had built something successful here, something that had taken years of hard work and dedication. A woman stood on the porch as they approached, and even from a distance, Zelda could see how frail she was, how the dress hung on her thin frame. But Catherine's smile was radiant as Cade helped Zelda down from the wagon and led her up to the house. "You must be Zelda," Catherine said, her voice soft but warm. "I have been looking forward to meeting you all week. Cade has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Zelda said, taking Catherine's offered hand gently, shocked at how delicate it felt, like bird bones. "Only the best things. Come inside, please. I have tea ready, and I want to hear everything about your quilting." The inside of the house was comfortable and well kept, with handmade curtains and rugs that spoke of Catherine's touch. Zelda's quilts were draped over the furniture, and seeing them here in this home made her realize just how much her work had meant. Catherine settled into a rocking chair by the window, and Cade brought tea while Zelda unwrapped the 2 new quilts. Catherine's reaction was everything Zelda could have hoped for. She gasped when she saw them, reaching out to touch the fabric with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her thin cheeks. "They are perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Zelda, you have such a gift." They spent the afternoon talking, Catherine asking questions about patterns and techniques while Zelda explained her process. Cade sat nearby, mostly silent, but Zelda could feel his eyes on her, watching the way she interacted with his sister, and she tried to be as gentle and patient as possible. Catherine tired easily, and when she began to cough, a deep, rattling sound that made Zelda's chest ache in sympathy, Cade immediately moved to help her. "I should rest," Catherine said apologetically when the coughing fit passed. "But Zelda, would you come back? Would you visit me again? I have so enjoyed talking with you." "Of course," Zelda said. "I would be happy to visit whenever you like." "Next Saturday," Catherine's eyes were hopeful. "And maybe you could bring your sewing things, show me how you do some of the stitches. I miss sewing so much, and even if I cannot do it myself anymore, I would love to watch." "Next Saturday," Zelda agreed. "I will bring everything." Cade helped his sister to her room, and when he returned, his eyes were red-rimmed. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "She has not been this animated in weeks. You have given her something to look forward to." "She is remarkable," Zelda said honestly. "I can see why you love her so much. Will you really come back? I know it is a long journey and I am asking a lot of your time." "I will come back," Zelda said firmly. Catherine is a wonderful person, and if spending time with me brings her happiness, then I am honored to do it. On the ride back to Butt, Zelda found herself thinking about the Owens siblings, about the bond between them, about the tragedy of a life cut short. She thought about Cade's devotion to his sister, the way he cared for her with such gentleness, and her feelings for him deepened into something more than attraction. This was a man of true character, a man who put family above all else, and that was rare and precious. The pattern of their Saturdays was established. Each week, Cade would collect Zelda from the boarding house, and they would make the long journey to the ranch. Zelda would spend hours with Catherine, showing her quilting techniques, telling stories, simply providing company. Sometimes Catherine felt well enough to sit outside in the sunshine, and Zelda would sew while they talked, her needle flying as Catherine watched with appreciation. Other times, Catherine was too weak to leave her bed, and Zelda would sit beside her, reading aloud or just holding her hand. During these visits, Zelda's feelings for Cade grew deeper and stronger, though she tried to keep them hidden. She saw how he cared for his sister, how he ran his ranch with fairness and integrity, how he treated everyone from his ranch hands to Zelda herself with respect and kindness. She saw how he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not watching, and wondered if perhaps he felt something too. But she did not dare speak of it, did not dare disturb the delicate balance of their relationship, especially with Catherine so ill. Summer deepened into fall, and Catherine grew weaker. The coughing fits became more frequent and more severe. The doctor visited regularly, but there was nothing more he could do except provide laudanum for the pain. On a Saturday in late September, when the cottonwood leaves were turning gold, Zelda arrived to find Catherine barely able to sit up, her breathing labored and her skin nearly translucent. "I am so glad you came," Catherine whispered, gripping Zelda's hand with surprising strength. "I need to talk to you about Cade." "You should rest," Zelda said gently. "We can talk later." "No, this cannot wait." Catherine's blue eyes, so like her brother's green ones, were urgent. "I am dying, Zelda. We all know it. I will be gone before the first snow falls, and I am worried about Cade." "He will grieve," Zelda said softly. "But he is strong. He will survive it." "He will survive, but he will be alone. He has spent the last 2 years caring for me, putting his life on hold. He has not courted anyone, has not thought about his own future, because he has been focused on making my remaining time comfortable." Catherine paused to catch her breath, each word clearly an effort. "But you, Zelda, you have brought light into both our lives. I see the way he looks at you, the way his whole face changes when he talks about you. He loves you, even if he has not said it, even if he does not realize it himself yet." Zelda felt her heart stutter. "Catherine, I do not think." "I know you love him too," Catherine continued. "I see it in your eyes, in the way you smile when he enters the room. And I am asking you, begging you, do not let him mourn alone. Do not let him push you away out of grief. Promise me you will be there for him, that you will let him love you when he is ready." Tears were streaming down Zelda's face now. "I promise," she whispered. "I promise I will be there for him." "Good," Catherine smiled, a peaceful expression settling over her features. "That is all I needed to hear. Now will you sew for a while? I love watching your hands work. It reminds me of Mama before she passed." Zelda sewed while Catherine dozed, her needle moving mechanically as her mind churned with emotion. She loved Cade, had loved him for weeks now, maybe months. But hearing Catherine speak of it, hearing the blessing and plea combined, made it both more real and more frightening. Catherine died 3 weeks later on a cold October morning, with Cade holding one hand and Zelda holding the other. Her passing was peaceful, a simple exhale that never became an inhale, and for a long moment, Neither Cade nor Zelda moved, as if by staying still they could keep her with them just a little longer. Then Cade made a sound, a broken, anguished noise that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, and he laid his head on his sister's still chest and wept. Zelda kept holding Catherine's cooling hand, her own tears falling silently, giving Cade space for his grief while still being present. After a long time, Cade lifted his head, and the look in his eyes was devastated but also grateful. "Thank you for being here," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for everything you did for her, for us. She loved you, Zelda. In the end, you were like the sister she never had." "I loved her too," Zelda said, and meant it with all her heart. The funeral was small, just Cade, Zelda, a few ranch hands, and the local minister. They buried Catherine on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under the cottonwood trees she had loved, and Cade stood stone-faced through the service, his grief locked so tight inside him that Zelda ached to reach out but did not know how. After the service, he took Zelda back to Bud in the wagon, and the silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. When they reached the boarding house, Cade helped her down, and for a moment, his hands lingered on her waist. "I need some time," he said quietly, "to sort through things, to figure out what comes next. But Zelda, I do not want to lose you. You have become important to me, more important than I realized until now." "Take all the time you need," Zelda said, though her heart was breaking. "I will be here when you are ready." But weeks passed with no word from Cade. October faded into November, and Zelda continued making quilts, though now she had no buyer for them. She sold a few through the mercantile, but her heart was not in the work the way it had been. She missed Catherine with a genuine grief, missed their conversations and the joy of seeing her face light up over a new pattern. But more than that, she missed Cade, missed his presence and his voice and the way he made her feel safe and valued. She had nearly given up hope when, on a snowy morning in early December, the door to the boarding house opened and Cade stood there, his hat in his hands and snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "Zelda," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Can I talk to you? Can we go somewhere private?" They went to the small parlor Mrs. Patterson kept for her boarders, empty at this time of morning, and Cade stood by the window, looking out at the falling snow. "I am sorry I have been gone so long," he said. "I needed time to think, to grieve, to figure out who I am without Catherine to care for. The ranch felt so empty without her, and I was not sure I could bear to stay there. But then I realized that running away was not honoring her memory. She loved that ranch, and she would want me to continue building a life there." "That sounds wise," Zelda said softly. "But a life alone is not much of a life." Cade turned to face her, and the intensity in his green eyes made her breath catch. "Catherine told me, before she died, that I was a fool if I did not tell you how I felt. She said you were the best thing to come into our lives, and that she would haunt me forever if I let you slip away out of stubbornness or fear." Zelda laughed despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "That sounds like Catherine. She was right, as she usually was about everything." Cade took a step closer. "Zelda, these past months with you have been the happiest I have had in years, even with the shadow of Catherine's illness hanging over us. You brought light and beauty and warmth into my life, and I was too focused on my sister to fully realize what that meant. But I realize it now. I love you, Zelda. I love your strength and your talent and your kindness. I love the way you made my sister smile, the way you never complained about the long journeys, the way you put your own work aside to spend time with someone who was dying." Zelda's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own words. "I love you too, Cade. I have for a long time, but I did not dare say it, did not dare hope you might feel the same." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her hands in his. "I want you to marry me, Zelda." I want you to come to the ranch and make it a home. I want you to fill it with your quilts and your laughter and your presence. I know I am asking a lot, taking you away from Bud, asking you to commit to a life with a man who is still grieving his sister. But I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to deserve you. You already deserve me, Zelda said, and then his mouth was on hers, gentle and warm and tasting of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she smiled up at him. Yes, Cade, I will marry you. I will come to the ranch and make it a home with you. There is one more thing, Cade said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. I have been keeping track of all the quilts you made, all the money I paid you. It comes to a substantial sum, more than enough for you to have saved quite a bit. But I realized something a few weeks ago. You have been sewing for me, for Catherine, for everyone else, but you have never made a quilt for yourself, have you? Zelda blinked, startled by the question. I never had time or materials to spare for myself. I thought so. Cade pressed the paper into her hands. This is a bank draft, enough to buy materials for the most elaborate quilt you can imagine. Before you come to the ranch, before we get married, I want you to make one quilt for yourself. Something beautiful, something that is just yours. Will you do that for me? The gesture was so unexpected, so thoughtful that Zelda could not speak for a moment. All her life she had been taking care of others, making things for others, putting her own needs last. And here was this man, asking her to do something purely for herself, giving her both permission and means to create something beautiful just because she deserved it. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will make a quilt for myself. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Butt, with Mrs. Patterson and a few of the ranch hands as witnesses. Zelda wore a dress she had sewn herself from beautiful cream-colored fabric Cade had insisted on buying for her, and she carried a small bouquet of dried flowers. Cade wore a new suit that made him look almost unbearably handsome, and when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, promising to love and cherish her for all their days. After the ceremony, they went back to the ranch, to the home that was now Zelda's as much as Cade's. He carried her over the threshold, and she laughed at the traditional gesture, feeling lighter than she had in years. The house was warm and welcoming, and in the master bedroom, Cade had laid out her quilts, all the ones she had made for Catherine, draped over chairs and the bed, creating a cocoon of color and warmth. Catherine wanted you to have these, he said. She told me before she died that they should stay with you, that you should be surrounded by your own beautiful work. Zelda touched the quilts, remembering the hours she had put into each one, the love and hope she had stitched into every seam. And she realized that in making these quilts, she had been making her way toward this moment, toward this home, toward this man. Each stitch had been a step on a journey she had not known she was taking. That night, they lay together in the big bed under one of Zelda's quilts, and Cade held her close, his warmth and strength surrounding her. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his lips against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "I came to Montana with nothing, running from grief and loss. I never imagined I would find a home. You saved me," Cade said. "You and your quilts. You brought beauty into Catherine's last months, and then you brought purpose back into my life when I thought I had lost everything. I am the one who should be grateful." "Then we are both grateful," Zelda said, turning in his arms to kiss him, "and both blessed." The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Zelda settled into life on the ranch, learning the rhythms of the place, getting to know the ranch hands and the neighbors. She set up a sewing room in one of the spare bedrooms, with good light and plenty of space to spread out her work. And she began to make her quilt, the one Cade had asked her to create for herself. It was the most ambitious project she had ever attempted, a complex pattern of intertwining vines and flowers that required hundreds of tiny pieces and thousands of stitches. She chose colors that reminded her of Montana: the gold of cottonwood leaves, the green of summer grass, the blue of the endless sky, the brown of the earth. As she worked, she thought about her journey, about all the loss and hardship that had brought her here, and about the unexpected joy she had found. Cade would come into the sewing room sometimes and watch her work, fascinated by the process. "I never get tired of seeing your hands move," he said once. "There is something almost magical about it, the way you take scraps of fabric and turn them into something so beautiful." "It is just patience and practice," Zelda said, but she was pleased by his admiration. "It is more than that. It is vision and skill and heart." He came to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "How much longer until it is finished?" "A few more weeks, I think. I want to take my time with this one, make it perfect." "It will be perfect because you are making it," Cade said, and kissed the top of her head. In early spring, when the cottonwoods were just beginning to bud, and the snow was melting in the high pastures, Zelda tied off the last thread and held up her quilt. It was magnificent, easily the best work she had ever done, and she felt a deep satisfaction in completing it. This was hers, made for herself, a testament to her skill and her journey. She spread it on the bed she shared with Cade, and when he came in that evening and saw it, he stopped in his tracks. "Zelda," he breathed, "that is extraordinary." "Do you like it?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "Like it? I am awestruck by it." He came closer, examining the intricate details, the perfect stitching. "This belongs in a museum, not on our bed." "It belongs here," Zelda said firmly. "On our bed in our home, keeping us warm. I did not make it to be displayed. I made it to be used and loved." That night, they christened the quilt properly, making love under its warmth, and Zelda felt complete in a way she never had before. She had made something beautiful for herself, had claimed her own worth and skill, and had found a man who cherished her for exactly who she was. Spring turned to summer, and Zelda discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little fear, the shadow of Catherine's illness making them aware of how fragile life could be. But the pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Zelda spent her time sewing baby clothes and a small quilt for the cradle, patterns of stars and moons that would watch over their child. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Cade pulled her close. "I have been thinking," he said, "about your dream of having a shop, selling your quilts directly to customers." "That was a long time ago," Zelda said. "I am happy here with you. I do not need a shop. But what if you could have both? What if we built you a small shop in Butte, somewhere you could sell your work and take commissions? You could go into town a few times a week, and I could manage the ranch. It would give you independence and purpose beyond being a rancher's wife." Zelda turned to look at him, surprised. "You would support that, of course. You have too much talent to keep it hidden out here on the ranch. The world should see your work, should have the chance to buy it, and you should have the satisfaction of building something of your own. What about when the baby comes? We will figure it out together. Maybe you work less, maybe we hire someone to help at the shop, maybe you bring the baby with you. But Zelda, I do not want you to give up your dreams just because you married me." She kissed him, long and deep, overwhelmed by his support and understanding. "I love you so much," she whispered against his lips. "More than I can ever say." "Show me in quilts," he said with a smile. "Fill our home with them, fill your shop with them, and I will see your love in every stitch." Their son was born in December, right as the first snow fell, a healthy baby with Cade's green eyes and Zelda's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Cade's father, and he was perfect in every way. Zelda wrapped him in the quilt she had made, and as she held him in the rocking chair by the window, the same chair where Catherine had sat so many times, she felt the presence of Cade's sister like a blessing over them all. "She would have loved him," Cade said, standing beside them, his hand on Zelda's shoulder. "She does love him," Zelda said softly. "Wherever she is watching over us, making sure we are happy." By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Zelda's shop was open in Butt, a small storefront with her name painted on the window in gold letters. "Zelda Owens, Fine Quilts and Sewing," it read, and below that, "Custom Work Welcome." The shop was an instant success, with customers coming from all over Montana to commission quilts or buy the ones she had already made. She hired a young woman named Emily to help mind the shop when she could not be there, and Cade was as good as his word, supporting her work fully. The years that followed were the happiest of Zelda's life. She and Cade had 3 more children, 2 daughters and another son, and the ranch house was always full of laughter and activity. She continued to quilt, her work becoming well known throughout the territory, and the shop thrived beyond anything she had imagined. But more than the success, more than the prosperity, was the deep and abiding love between her and Cade, a love that grew stronger with each passing year. On their 10th anniversary, Cade took Zelda up to the hillside where Catherine was buried. They stood under the cottonwood trees, now much taller, and looked out over the ranch spread below them. "Do you remember when I first saw your quilts?" Cade asked. "I knew immediately that they were special, that the person who made them had to be special too." "You bought them all," Zelda said, remembering. "I thought you were crazy. I was desperate to bring Catherine comfort, but I was also already half in love with you, even though I had not met you yet. The care and beauty in your work told me everything I needed to know about your heart." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "And then when I met you, when I saw your kindness and strength, I fell the rest of the way. You were sewing quilts to earn enough to eat, barely surviving, and I bought them all and told you to make one for yourself. Do you know why? To give me materials to work with," Zelda said, though she was starting to suspect there was more to it. "That was part of it. But mostly, I wanted you to see your own worth, to understand that you deserved beautiful things too, not just to make them for others. I wanted you to claim your talent and your value." He smiled, that warm smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "And you did. You made yourself a quilt, and then you made yourself a life, a business, a family. You took what I offered and multiplied it 100 times over. We did it together," Zelda said. "You gave me the opportunity, but you also gave me love and support and belief in myself. Without you, I would still be in that boarding house, sewing scraps together just to survive. Without you, I would be alone and grief-stricken, lost without purpose. We saved each other, Zelda. That is what love does." They stood on that hillside as the sun set, painting the sky in golds and pinks, and Zelda thought about the journey that had brought them here. She had arrived in Montana with nothing but a needle and thread and determination to survive. She had found work, and then love, and then purpose. She had created beauty out of scraps, had built a life out of grief and loss and unexpected kindness. The quilt she had made for herself still lay on their bed, faded now from years of use and washing, but still beautiful, still warm. It reminded her every night that she was worthy of beauty, worthy of love, worthy of claiming space in the world for herself. And every morning, when she woke beside Cade, surrounded by the home they had built together, she felt grateful for the cowboy who had bought all her quilts and told her to make one for herself, for the man who had seen her worth when she could barely see it herself. As they walked back down the hillside toward the ranch house, where their children were waiting for dinner, Cade pulled her close. "I love you, Zelda Owens. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. And I love you, Cade Owens, with every stitch of my heart." In the years that followed, their love story became something of a legend in Butte and the surrounding territory. People would come into Zelda's shop and ask to hear how she and Cade met, and she would tell them about the quilts, about Catherine, about the kindness that had changed her life. Some of those people would leave with quilts of their own, carrying a piece of that love and beauty into their own homes. When Thomas grew old enough to understand, Zelda taught him about quilting, about how each piece of fabric represented a choice, a moment, a memory. She showed him the first quilt she had made after coming to Montana, the one she had sold to his father, and explained how that single transaction had led to everything else. "Your father saw something in my work that I did not see in myself," she told him. "He saw value and beauty and potential. And then he gave me the space and resources to develop it. That is what love does, Thomas. It sees the best in us and helps us become it." Thomas grew to be a fine young man, taking after his father in looks and temperament, with his mother's artistic eye. He helped manage the ranch and showed no interest in quilting himself, but he had a deep appreciation for his mother's work and the story behind it. He would tell people with pride about how his mother had built her business from nothing, how she had become one of the most respected artisans in Montana. Their daughters, Catherine and Sarah, named for the sister Cade had lost, and Zelda's first friend in Butte, both learned to quilt under their mother's patient instruction. Catherine, in particular, showed remarkable talent, her stitches as fine and even as Zelda's own. She would eventually take over the shop when Zelda grew older, continuing the family tradition and expanding it, teaching other women the craft, and creating a community of quilters throughout the territory. But all that was still in the future. For now, in these golden years of their marriage, Zelda and Cade focused on the simple joys of family, of work they loved, of a home they had built together. Every quilt Zelda made carried in it some echo of her story, some thread of the journey from poverty to prosperity, from loneliness to love. On cold winter nights, when the wind howled around the ranch house and snow piled high against the walls, Cade and Zelda would sit by the fire, often with one or more children in their laps, wrapped in Zelda's quilts. And Cade would sometimes run his hand over the fabric, feeling the stitches beneath his fingers, and say, "Tell me again about the first quilt you made for yourself." And Zelda would tell him, though he knew the story by heart, about choosing the fabrics, about the pattern of vines and flowers, about the feeling of making something beautiful just for herself. "It taught me that I mattered," she would say, "that my dreams and desires were worth pursuing." "You gave me that gift, Cade, when you told me to make a quilt for myself." "You gave me a greater gift," Cade would reply. "You gave me hope when I had lost it, purpose when I was adrift, and love when I thought I would never feel it again." "Every quilt you make is beautiful, Zelda, but the most beautiful thing you ever created is this life we share." As their children grew and started families of their own, the ranch became a gathering place for multiple generations. Grandchildren would run through the halls where Zelda had once walked as a newlywed, and she would make quilts for each of them, special patterns that reflected their personalities and interests. The tradition of quilting passed down through the family, with daughters and granddaughters learning the craft, each adding their own style and vision to the work. But it always came back to that first principle Cade had taught Zelda, that everyone deserved to make something beautiful for themselves, that self-worth was not selfish but necessary. Zelda made sure every woman who worked in her shop, every student who came to learn from her, understood this truth. "Make quilts for others, yes," she would tell them. "Make them with love and care, but also make quilts for yourself. Claim your own beauty, your own value. You are worth the time and effort it takes to create something lovely just for you. 20 years after their wedding, Zelda and Cade stood once again on Catherine's hillside, this time surrounded by their grown children and a passel of grandchildren. They had come to place a new headstone on Catherine's grave, one with an inscription Zelda had composed. Cade Owens, beloved sister and friend, who taught us that love sees the best in people and helps them become it. After the ceremony, as the family walked back to the ranch house for dinner, Thomas fell into step beside his parents. "You know," he said, "I have been thinking about the story of how you two met, and I realize now that it is not just a love story. It is a story about dignity and respect, about seeing people for who they truly are rather than what their circumstances suggest." "That is exactly right," Cade said, pride evident in his voice. "Your mother was sewing quilts to survive, but she was never just surviving. She was creating, dreaming, hoping. I just recognized that and gave her room to grow." "And your father," Zelda added, "was grieving and searching for ways to comfort his sister, but he was also building something bigger without even knowing it. He was building a bridge between two lonely people, creating a path toward love and partnership." "I want to find that kind of love," Thomas said quietly. "The kind that sees and values and builds." "You will," Zelda assured him, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "When you are ready, when the time is right, you will recognize it. And when you do, remember to look beyond circumstances to character, beyond appearances to heart. That is where true love lives." The family gathered that night around a long table laden with food, multiple generations sharing stories and laughter. Zelda looked around at all the faces, these people who existed because a cowboy had walked into a mercantile and bought some quilts, because he had seen value in her work and extended kindness to a stranger. So much had grown from that single moment of connection, from that choice to reach out rather than pass by. After dinner, as the younger grandchildren were being put to bed, Zelda slipped away to her sewing room. She had a commission to finish, a wedding quilt for a young couple in Butte, but for a moment, she just sat in her chair and looked around at the space she had created. Fabric lined the shelves in every color imaginable. Her tools hung neatly on the wall. Finished quilts were folded carefully in a cedar chest. This room represented years of work, countless hours of stitching, thousands of decisions about pattern and color and design. But more than that, it represented freedom and self-determination. It represented the journey from survival to thriving, from making quilts just to earn enough to eat to making quilts as an expression of art and love. It represented the transformation that happens when someone sees your worth and helps you see it too. Cade appeared in the doorway as if summoned by her thoughts. "There you are," he said softly. "I should have known I would find you here." "I was just thinking," Zelda said, "about everything that has happened since that day you walked into the mercantile. About how much my life has changed, how much I have changed." "You have not changed," Cade said, coming to stand beside her chair. "You have only become more fully yourself. The woman you are now is the same woman who was sewing quilts in that boarding house, just with more resources and opportunities to express her gifts." "Maybe," Zelda said, "but I think I have grown too. I have learned that accepting help is not weakness, that love is about supporting each other's dreams, that creating beauty matters even when the world seems harsh." "Those are good lessons," Cade said. "I have learned a few things myself over the years." "What have you learned?" Zelda asked, curious. "I have learned that the best investment I ever made was not in horses or cattle or land," Cade said. "It was in a woman with talented hands and a courageous heart. I have learned that grief does not have to be the end of joy, that new love can honor old love rather than replace it. And I have learned that sometimes the best way to heal your own heart is to help someone else find their wings. Zelda stood and moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. I think Catherine would be proud of us, she said. Of what we have built, of the family we have created, of the love we have shared. I know she would be, Cade said. Because she was the one who pushed me toward you, who made me see what was right in front of me. She knew before I did that you were the person I needed, the person who would make my life complete. They stood together in the quiet sewing room, surrounded by the evidence of Zelda's craft and the warmth of their shared history. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the darkness. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, they were warm and content. I should finish that wedding quilt, Zelda said eventually, though she made no move to pull away. It can wait until tomorrow, Cade said. Tonight, just be here with me. We have earned a moment to simply be grateful for what we have. So they stayed there, husband and wife, partners and lovers, two people who had found each other in unlikely circumstances and built a life of meaning and beauty. The quilt that Zelda had made for herself, all those years ago, still covered their bed. It had been repaired multiple times, patches sewn carefully over worn spots, but it remained whole and beautiful, a testament to the durability of things made with love and care. Just like their marriage, just like their family, just like the legacy they were building. All of it stitched together with patience and dedication. All of it a pattern of choices and moments and connections. All of it starting from that single day when a cowboy walked into a mercantile and saw past the surface to the heart of things. Thank you, Zelda whispered into the silence. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for valuing my work when I could barely feed myself, for loving me when I did not know I was worthy of love. You were always worthy, Cade said firmly. I just recognized what was already there. But if you are thanking me, then I must thank you too. Thank you for bringing beauty into Catherine's last days, for giving me a reason to hope again, for building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are. They stayed in the sewing room a while longer, talking quietly about their children and grandchildren, about plans for the ranch and the shop, about all the ordinary details that made up their extraordinary life together. And when they finally made their way to bed, sliding under the quilt Zelda had made for herself all those years ago, they held each other close, grateful for every day, every moment, every stitch that had led them here. The shop in Butte continued to thrive for many more years, becoming a beloved institution in the town. Women would bring their daughters to learn quilting from Zelda or her daughter Catherine, and the quilts that came out of that shop were treasured as heirlooms, passed down through generations. Each one carried not just warmth, but a story, a reminder that beauty can emerge from hardship, that talent deserves recognition, that kindness can change lives. As Zelda grew older, her hands becoming gnarled with arthritis, she could no longer sew the tiny, perfect stitches that had made her famous. But she could still design patterns, could still teach, could still share her knowledge and experience with younger quilters. And she could still remember that cold spring morning when hunger made her hands shake, when she was sewing just to earn enough to eat, never imagining that her quilts would lead her to love and prosperity and purpose. Cade's hair turned silver and his step slowed, but his love for Zelda never wavered. He would sit for hours watching her work, even when she could only supervise rather than sew herself, and his face would hold the same expression of admiration and affection it had held 30 years before. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he would tell her, and she would laugh and swat at him, but her eyes would shine with joy. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch. Tables were set up in the yard under the cottonwood trees, laden with food and decorated with wildflowers. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become a symbol of enduring love in the community. Thomas stood to give a toast. His own children gathered around him. "My parents," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "have taught us many things over the years. They have taught us about hard work and perseverance, about family and faith. But most of all, they have taught us about love. Not the easy, romantic love of storybooks, but the real, lasting love that is built day by day through small acts of kindness and respect." He paused, looking at his parents seated at the head table, Cade's arm around Zelda's shoulders. "My father saw my mother's worth when she could barely see it herself. He gave her the resources and support she needed to build her dreams. My mother brought beauty and hope into my father's life when he was drowning in grief. She gave him a reason to look forward instead of back. Together, they created not just a family but a legacy of love and creativity that will continue for generations." The crowd cheered, and Zelda felt tears stream down her face. Cade pulled her closer and whispered in her ear, "He is right, you know, about all of it. We were lucky," Zelda said. "Lucky to find each other." "Not luck," Cade corrected gently. "Grace and choice. We chose to see the best in each other. We chose to support rather than constrain. We chose love every day, even when it was hard." As the party continued into the evening, with music and dancing and stories shared, Zelda found herself thinking about all the quilts she had made over the years. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each one unique, each one carrying a piece of her heart. Some had been wedding gifts, some burial shrouds, some everyday comfort against the cold. But all of them had been made with care and intention. All of them had mattered. Just like the moments of her life, each one a small stitch in the larger pattern. The hard times and the joyful times, the losses and the victories, the ordinary days and the extraordinary ones. All of it stitched together into a beautiful whole, a life well lived, a love well earned. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Zelda and Cade stood once more on Catherine's hillside, watching the sun set over the ranch. This had become their tradition over the years, coming here on important occasions to remember the woman whose illness had brought them together, whose blessing had given them permission to love. "You think she knew?" Zelda asked, as she had asked many times before. "Do you think Catherine understood that her illness, as terrible as it was, would lead to something beautiful?" "I think she hoped," Cade said. "I think she saw the connection between us before we did, and she hoped that after she was gone, we would find our way to each other. That was her gift to us, Zelda, not just her blessing but her vision." "Then we have honored that gift," Zelda said with certainty. "We have built a good life, raised good children, created beauty in the world. Whatever else we have done or failed to do, we have honored Catherine's hope for us." "Yes," Cade agreed. "Yes, we have." They stood on the hillside as darkness fell and stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative conversations, their courtship, their wedding, the births of their children, and every important moment in between. The same stars that would continue to shine long after they were gone, watching over their descendants, the bearers of their love story. "I need to tell you something," Zelda said suddenly. "Something I have never quite put into words before." "What is it?" Cade's voice was gentle, patient. "When you told me to make a quilt for myself, when you gave me that bank draft, and said I deserved something beautiful, you changed my understanding of my own worth. I had spent so long thinking that my value lay only in what I could do for others, in how useful I could be. The idea that I deserved beauty for myself, that I was worth the time and effort and resources, was revolutionary to me." She turned to face him, taking both his hands. You taught me that I mattered, Cade. Not just my work, but me, myself, the person I am beneath the skills and talents. That lesson changed everything. It allowed me to accept your love, to believe I deserved it. It allowed me to dream bigger than just survival. It allowed me to become the woman I am today. Cade's eyes were bright with emotion. You taught me something just as important, he said. You taught me that life continues after loss, that new love does not dishonor old love, that there is always room for more beauty in the world. You taught me that strength does not mean bearing everything alone, that accepting help and offering it are both acts of courage. You saved my life, Zelda, just as surely as I may have helped change yours. They kissed there on the hillside, under the stars, as they had kissed 1,000 times before and would kiss 1,000 times again. Two people who had found each other against the odds, who had built something lasting and true, who had kept their promises to each other and to themselves. When they finally made their way back to the ranch house, the lights were warm in the windows, and they could hear laughter from inside where their children and grandchildren were still celebrating. This was home, this place they had built together, filled with love and life and the evidence of their shared journey. 40 years, Zelda marveled as they paused on the porch. 40 years since you walked into that mercantile and bought all my quilts. Best purchase I ever made, Cade said with a grin, though I think I got the better end of the bargain. We both did, Zelda said. That is the beauty of true partnership. Both people win. Inside, their grandson had pulled out an old quilt, one of the first Zelda had made after coming to the ranch. He was showing it to his young wife, explaining the pattern and the stitching. Zelda's heart swelled watching him, seeing how the appreciation for her craft had passed down through the generations. Tell us the story again, Grandma, the young wife asked, about how you and Grandpa met. Zelda settled into her favorite chair, Cade beside her, and began the story she had told so many times before. But it never got old, this tale of quilts and kindness, of seeing worth in unexpected places, of love growing from the smallest seeds. Her audience listened raptly, and when she got to the part where Cade told her to make a quilt for herself, several of the younger women nodded as if understanding something important. That is what I want, one of them said softly. A love that sees me, that values what I create, that wants me to have beautiful things, not just make them for others. Then hold out for that, Zelda advised. Do not settle for less, and in the meantime make beautiful things for yourself. Do not wait for someone else's permission or resources. Start where you are, with what you have, and create beauty for yourself. That is how you build the foundation for the kind of love I have been blessed to find. The evening wound down eventually, families departing to their own homes, children carried off to bed, the house growing quiet. Zelda and Cade prepared for bed, moving through the familiar rituals of 40 years together. As they slid under the quilts, including the one Zelda had made for herself so long ago, now carefully preserved and brought out only on special occasions, Cade pulled her close. You have any regrets? He asked. Anything you wish you had done differently? Zelda thought about it seriously, reviewing the years they had shared. There had been challenges, certainly. Times when money was tight, when children were sick, when they disagreed about decisions. There had been losses beyond Catherine, friends who had died, dreams that had not materialized exactly as planned. But regrets? No, she said finally. No regrets. Everything that happened, good and bad, led us here to this moment, to this life. I would not change any of it, because changing anything might mean losing this. I feel the same, Cade said, though I wish I had met you sooner, had more years with you. We have had enough years to build something remarkable, Zelda pointed out. Not everyone gets that. "We have been blessed, Cade, truly blessed." "Blessed indeed," he agreed, and they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms and Zelda's quilts, warm and safe and deeply loved. The years continued to pass as years do, bringing changes and challenges and joys. The shop eventually passed to Catherine Jr., who ran it with the same dedication her mother had shown, training a new generation of quilters and keeping the family tradition alive. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations as Cade slowed down, proving himself a capable manager with his father's fairness and his mother's eye for beauty. The younger children and grandchildren spread out across Montana and beyond, but they always came home for important occasions, and the ranch remained the heart of the family. Cade passed away first, on a spring morning much like the one when he had first seen Zelda's quilts. He died peacefully in his sleep, with Zelda beside him, and his last words were, "Thank you for a beautiful life." Zelda mourned him deeply, but she did not fall apart. He had taught her too well that life continues, that love endures even after death, that the best way to honor someone's memory is to keep living fully. He continued working in small ways, designing patterns if not sewing them herself, teaching when she had the energy, always surrounded by family. Her children and grandchildren wrapped her in the quilts she had made over the years, and she would run her old hands over the fabric and remember the stories behind each one. This quilt was made for Thomas's wedding, that one for Catherine's first baby. This one was a commission from a rancher's wife who became a dear friend. That one was simply made on a beautiful summer day when the world felt full of possibility. And always, the quilt she had made for herself held a special place, carefully preserved, a reminder of the moment when everything changed. A reminder that she was worthy, that she mattered, that her dreams and desires had value. When Zelda passed away, peacefully and surrounded by 3 generations of family, it was with a smile on her face. They buried her beside Cade and Catherine on the hillside under the cottonwoods, and covered her with the quilt she had made for herself, the one that had started everything. At the funeral, Thomas spoke about his parents' love story, about quilts and kindness and seeing the best in people. And every person there went home determined to live a little more like the Owenses, to create a little more beauty, to value the people in their lives a little more deeply. The shop continued for many more years, eventually becoming a Montana landmark, a place where people came not just to buy quilts, but to hear the story of the woman who had built it. Zelda's quilts became valuable as art pieces, collector's items, but the family kept most of them for themselves, using them as they were intended, letting them warm new babies and comfort sick children, and celebrate weddings and anniversaries. And in every quilt, in every stitch, was the echo of a love story that began with seeing worth in unexpected places, with extending kindness to a stranger, with understanding that everyone deserves to create something beautiful for themselves. The story of Zelda and Cade Owens became the story the family told itself about who they were and what they valued, a foundation for generations to come. Because in the end, that is what love does. It sees, it values, it nurtures. It gives resources and support while still honoring independence and dreams. It builds rather than constrains, celebrates rather than diminishes. And when it is done right, when it is built day by day through small acts of kindness and respect, it creates something that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. It creates a legacy stitched in love, warmed by care, and beautiful enough to withstand the test of time. Just like a quilt made by skilled hands and a generous heart. Just like the life Zelda and Cade built together, one stitch, one day, one loving choice at a time.